Alright, let's go ahead and get started on this review for Avowed. And before we get started on this, just know that it's going to be a bit of a long one. As you can see from the length of the video, starting off with the overview of the game, Avowed is a bit of a mix between what we've come to know from Obsidian with their first/third-person shooter type RPGs and their CRPGs, where it does have a skill tree and combat and the general feel of a first and third person game, but the story and characters of a CRPG style game. Be mindful though that in the near future we are getting Outer Worlds 2, but at the first attempt at that new IP that came out in 2019, it was just good. Yeah, just good. Nothing special or great, and I think the writing in that game and the voice acting were some of the best parts. And I had a very similar feeling to Avowed as I did to Outer Worlds after finishing it a couple years ago, which is why I'm going to bring it up and maybe compare it throughout this review. I also think Avowed is pretty good. In my opinion, it's a bit better than Outer Worlds, slightly disappointing in some aspects since it doesn't really change up the formula from the previous games in the same category, and nothing causes it to stand out or above the rest, but it does have some decent RPG elements, some mediocre combat, but amazing characters and world. But it equates to just a pretty good game. And with that, let's go ahead and get started with the story. So the story is Pillars of Eternity universe, where your characters are sort of thrust into the middle of an ongoing conflict that is currently happening in a faraway land. And well, that's called the Living Lands. You're an envoy that's sent for the Adir Empire. You're here to discover and investigate this plague that's been ruining the land. The Empire wants to more or less seize control of this land and can't do so when it's under distress. But also by assisting it, maybe that'll allow the Emperor to get his foot in the door at taking control. And you can kind of see where this is going. Send the envoy, which is you, to fix everything and allow that to show some good faith. That way he can snake his way in. And just like in many RPGs, and especially in this universe, the story begins much smaller, and then as you get to know citizens and the land itself, then it slowly raises the stakes over time each time that you get to a bigger and more important city with more important characters. Now, there are a ton of nuances with each individual who are all fantastically voice acted. Most characters, including the average NPC, will have a small conversation with you, in which you almost always have a dialogue option. And this is the bread and butter of the story that lets you take shape of the world in the way that you want to play it. Do you want to kind of piss everyone off and be a dickhead? You'll probably end up with a bad ending, but hey, it's your choice. For me, I chose to be mostly good and help the people around me, but sometimes be a witty asshole. So crack a joke sometimes and help them out when I can. I won't be spoiling any larger story elements here or dive much deeper into it than that, but just know that the characters, the writing, and the world building, they're all done fantastically. Where this game misses though is keeping you engaged in that overall narrative and the ending. I enjoyed the smaller interactions with these characters, and even though it didn't lead to a larger change or a really great ending, it still impressed me for the most part. Sometimes the differences were deceptively hidden behind specific dialogue options. Overall, I don't think you'll be disappointed with the elements of the story, but without a cohesive ending, I personally felt that it was a little lacking. I think they did just an alright job here on that, and since we're talking about the story, let's move on to the quest. Now, we are going to talk about the main and side quest here, but just like in most open world games or open zone games in this case, you can more or less tackle these when and where you wish. Of course, to reach the next zone in the game, you will have to progress the main story past a specific point to do so, but once you enter that region, it's more or less free game on when and where you want to get these things done. To give some insight on how much I completed, I did every single side quest in the first 2 zones. Then I did about 50% of them in the last 2 zones. And this is because I felt there was minimal rewards and minimal character growth. There are definitely some funny, charming, and well-structured quest lines here, but that was really it. None of them impressed me to a point that I felt like I needed to continue engaging in them because it wasn't really any sort of top-tier content. And to give an example, the first side quest that most players will probably come across is a woman that tells you that she thinks she's cursed and needs to see a specialist to get more details. She's been attacked randomly, the plants in her house are dying, and she was even forced out of her home by some monsters. You go to her cabin to clear out these monsters, and you end up finding some clues to fix her woes. Upon clearing out the home, you find a mural of a monster and her as a human dancing together. You read a book that she was researching and then return it to the quest giver. You explain that you found the book and the mural, and well, that gets you to ask a couple questions, and she explains that she believes half of her soul is within a monster. Now, you can either convince her to befriend this monster and learn more about it, or to forget it and move on with her life. This is a fun little interaction, but it doesn't really lead anywhere. As soon as you make that final choice to tell her what to do, that's it. You never see her again. You complete this quest and you don't find out anything later on. You don't return to her home and see anything important. She doesn't pop up later in the story where you see her and this monster that she befriended maybe getting along. It does literally nothing. That's the end of the quest. And I get that sometimes quests are meant to have a solid start and ending point, but all I got was this stupid little ring from it and a slightly amusing story. This quest was slightly interesting, and most others are okay for the most part, and some are not that interesting. Hence why after sticking with the side quest in these first two zones, completing them fully, I had a few chuckles and a few smiles. Others had me pretty bored, just sitting there go, dang, when is this going to be done so I can clear the rest of this section of the map? The rewards and sometimes decent weapons that you get from this are random trinkets and goodies that you can equip, but nothing really great. And enough about side quest with that. The main quest, we spoke about the story a little bit there, and there's not a ton to dig into other than stating that you can complete them at your leisure for the most part, and you're not really penalized for taking a stroll around the countryside to explore and loot until your heart's content. I do wish that some of the side content that I completed fed into the main story, and without that here, none of the side content really felt required, and only really optional if you wanted to explore a bit more and attempt to find maybe a unique piece of gear. Also, another note, everyone is just always angry or mad about something. No one in this world seems to ever be happy or anything. Everyone is in turmoil and either already very mad or trying to find a reason to become more pissed off. I don't know why I can't find somebody just chilling and having fun in this world. There's a few characters that are more chill than others, but there's always some sort of conflict at the end of the day. And well, since we're talking about conflict, let's get into the next topic, which is gear, combat, and gameplay. I want to specifically throw all of these together into a bigger section because they all do flow together and sort of revolve around each other. And I'll leave most of the progression parts that we're going to talk about with skills and gear until we get beyond this section onto the next one. So when it comes to gear itself, you have a multitude of varieties. You can have 2 sets of weapons, which is pretty cool that you can hot swap between back and forth. You have 2 slots that you can equip a main hand and offhand item into. And unless you choose a weapon that requires 2 hands, then you can really choose anything that you want it to be. You can make a secondary set of weapons to swap to and utilize that kind of functions as the opposite of the first one. Now, this is pretty great for the most part, and I like the idea of having different weapons for different situations. For example, long range and short range. Stay at a distance with your pistol, rifle, or spells. But the moment that the enemies come flowing into your view, sprinting at you, then swap to your melee weapon and bash some skulls in. But a slight negative view that I have on this is the time to swap between your loadouts. The time it takes to swap and the responsiveness of being able to use that weapon that you've swapped to is very, very slow. It takes around 3 seconds to swap, and then another 1 to 2 seconds before you can actively use that weapon. So you're looking at roughly 5 seconds from the moment that you click that swap button to be able to use said weapon. This game is focused on action combat, and 4 to 5 seconds of not attacking is a pretty long time, especially when you're surrounded or being pummeled already. If they could cut this down to just 2, maybe 3 seconds overall, then I wouldn't mind it so much. But I became pretty frustrated on multiple occasions where I ended up just sticking with my single weapon of choice, which for me was a rifle, and I would just end up sprinting or dodging away because this allowed me more time to load up another bullet and stay on the offensive rather than swap to another one which took longer and did less damage. Also, the fact that there's no quick swap to be able to choose from a few different weapons that are maybe favorite favorited to have access to at any given time is slightly disappointing. I wanted to be able to swap between dual wielding my ice axe and flame sword to then maybe throwing a shield and spear on, but still have the options of range and spells in my back pocket at the same time. You're allowed to collect a massive arsenal of weapons, but yet you're only allowed to use 2 sets of them at any given time. It's a little bit weird how they kept you limited in this way. Sure, you can go into the menu and change out these loadouts, and it's pretty seamless for the most part, but I just felt like if they did something as a better overall system to hot swap even faster and have a more diverse set of options with those hot swaps, then it would make it feel a lot better. But onto the armor and accessories. These are not able to be swapped at the press of a button. You have to go into the menu and choose which one that you want ahead of time. But the armor gives you benefits of overall damage reduction and sometimes additional damage reduction and other benefits if the quality or rarity is high enough. But obviously the heavier the armor, then they have a negative benefit that comes with it as well. So you want to wear medium or heavy armor, then you're gonna have a decrease in overall stamina and mana. This is something that honestly didn't really affect me much at all, so I chose the best and heaviest armor. Pretty much always medium or heavy, since the negatives weren't really that big of a deal. They were very minimal. They also had some of the best perks in the game for those armor types. The unique ones as well had additional damage reduction and maybe some movement speed. A side note with that though, they are also ugly as hell. I never found an outfit in the entire game that made me go, damn, this is pretty fucking cool. And every piece of gear does change your look cosmetically from the outside, but they never impressed me. And for such a diverse fantasy world, the armor designs are fucking boring and plain. The gear does come with generic normal stuff as well, or uniques that have different upgrades that you can make stronger over time. And this is the same for weapons, so the generic stuff is literally the exact same as the unique ones, they just don't have the added perks that come with them. So there's almost no reason to use a generic piece of armor or weapon. But on to the accessories. You get a number of different rings and trinkets and amulets, and these give you very specific and minor buffs that normally don't really add up to much. But just like with the gear, you find a unique one, you might get that bit of extra oomph that you needed in combat, and you see, that's about it. That's the issue with these. You only get that very small minor upgrade. There's nothing that fundamentally changes anything about how you play the game. Early on in the game, I got a ring that made me heal while I was in water, and I thought this was going to be pretty awesome, and I put it on and I did use it. But whenever I began realizing that the healing factor when I was standing in water, and I kind of chose to specifically fight in water so that way I could get healed at the same time, the healing was so minor that it literally did almost nothing. I would rather chug a potion or eat some food and have the heal from those work instead. The healing from the ring really didn't add up to be anything significant. So instead I ended up swapping it over to something that gave me extra base stats like perception and intellect, or even just add something basic like additional carry weight, which again, didn't really change how I played the game, so this kinda sucks. Now these perks carry over from accessories to every single other piece of gear that you have. Every unique item has a perk on it, and they all function in that very minor way. They're identical in the way of being so small and so insignificant that they don't really matter. An extra 1% movement speed, or an extra 2% this or that, it doesn't really add up to anything significant at all. Sometimes I would get something that was like extra 10% crit chance. And sure, maybe that adds up over time, especially if you're building into crit and everything else, but does that change how I play the game? No. Does it make it where I do a bit more damage in the long run? Yeah, it does, but does it change the way that I feel about the game or the way that I'm going to go about my next fight? Not at all. And another example of these perks is I found a rifle that had faster reloading as a perk, and it also ricocheted some of the damage to a nearby enemy. This was pretty cool, so I actually stuck with this rifle for the entire game after that, because there was almost nothing else that I came across that was interesting in the slightest. But there was also nothing that enhanced this playstyle either. I didn't come across something that allowed me to ricochet multiple times, or something that would make me reload even faster, or maybe more bullets in the chamber at the same time. None of that occurred here, and that's what I wanted. I wanted to tailor my playstyle to be towards this rifle that I really liked and I enjoyed the perks. Instead, I just kept upgrading it to do a very small amount more damage. And that was it. Now, you don't need to spend any amount of time in the menus really, because the gear is just not complicated enough to force you in the menus to try to read over some of the nuanced aspects of it. You just start playing the game, pick one that looks like it has an okay perk on it, and you just keep chugging along. Some may consider this to be a positive, and for the most part, I would say it's a decent way of looking at it. But yet there's no nuance to this gear and progression that allowed you to change up the combat on a periodic basis. It didn't allow it to become less boring, which is how I would describe the combat in this game. Yeah, you're fucking boring, dog. Yeah, I said it. It feels more like a game that I played from 10 or 15 years ago. The Elder Scrolls, Fallout, even their previous game Outer Worlds. It feels so much like a mixture of these games that I've already played for such a long time, but with just slight tweaks. I've played this exact same combat for years, and I'm getting tired of it. I want something better and to be expanded upon. Give me something new. Literally anything. But it fails to do this, and whenever you walk up to a group of enemies, you dodge, you block the same way. There's not a large variety of enemies in the first place, so as soon as you dodge or block their attack and then you land one of your own, and you just rinse and repeat this until you're done with the game. There are some environmental plants that allow you to drop them into an area for a small area of effect one-time use, and they are only in very specific locations. But that's it. Nothing to break up the combat. You have spells and powers that you can use, but again, they don't really do anything to change what you're already doing. I was honestly so bored of the combat after maybe 8 to 10 hours that once I found a way to kill things as quickly as possible, I really just kept doing that and moving along. I never felt challenged. I never felt that an enemy gave me a reason to change up my combat style or the way that I approached it. You also get these grenades that initially seems like a pretty cool element to the gameplay, but literally all they do is add elemental damage to things or a small explosion. They have such small amounts of damage that they almost aren't even worth using. Unless you're attempting to inflict a very specific status element on an enemy, there is practically no point in using them. Just save them for your environmental puzzles and leave it at that. Because wouldn't it be cool to be able to take the grenades and say, okay, this is how I want to play this game. Maybe I want to just fucking throw grenades at people. So instead of throwing one at a time, you could throw 3 at a time. Or maybe you can make it to where you can combine them into a bigger explosion. Or if you hit one, it bounces to another enemy or something. You can tailor the combat to these specific types of playstyle. Or even though the grenades are consumable, maybe someone can play around that consumable in a way that they feel is interesting. But the game doesn't allow for any of that, sadly. Now, I do say all of this, but the combat itself isn't bad. It's just boring. I never got frustrated or felt like it wasn't responsive or that I died to something that didn't really make sense. It was all very well polished and felt just fine. The boring aspects of the gear that carry over to the combat just make it very stale. I couldn't help but get a little bored, and I swapped out my weapons on the regular for the first 10 to 15 hours, but after a while, I really just stuck with what worked. Because if I was going to be bored when fighting, I at least wanted it to be over as quickly as possible and to move on to the rest of the game. For the exploring of the environment though, this part was honestly pretty fucking awesome. I enjoyed climbing around a random building just to see what was at the top, and sometimes I'd be rewarded with a random piece of gear or junk, and that's perfectly fine. It was cool to just look at something and then find a way to get to the top of that structure or mountain that's standing in front of me. The movement is pretty fluid and was always responsive. It always did kind of what I wanted and how I wanted it done for the most part. Did it sometimes feel a little bit janky and mess up? Sure, but maybe that happened less than 5 times in my total playthrough, where it didn't really do exactly what I wanted, but it was so small. Now, a little complaint that I have is the way that they set up the running or sprinting in this game. I don't know if it was just me, but the moment that I would turn my camera slightly to the left or right too much while also moving to the left or right, my character would stop sprinting and begin walking. I'd be able to run in a very straight line and only move my camera, meaning that I could move my camera completely freely while pressing the W key and running straight forward. So I could only run at the exact thing that I was looking at, or I would have to look at a new thing and run straight towards that. The moment that I hit the A or D key to kind of run at an angle, bam, you're walking, you stop running, you have no option, you have to run in a straight line. Now, I'm not sure if this was intended because of the character model that you can see in third person, but it is something that I wanted to bring up because I kind of had to reprogram the way that I run in games, which is really weird, where I can normally just run around without issue. This one, if I tried to run at any amount of an angle, it just wouldn't let me. So very weird, but figured I'd point that out here. Now that we're past that huge section of gameplay though, and the overall gear, let's talk about progression, which is also pretty big. Progression is vitally connected to the pillars of gameplay. And yes, I did mean that as a pun, because Pillars of Eternity. Anyway, you have two main ways of progression. You level up and you can increase your base stats and gain new abilities and perks. And the other way is upgrading your gear and items when you collect things like Adra and ingots. The Adra is this weird resource of like rocks in this world, but you don't need to know about that. Anyways, the skills and the perks, again, are mostly boring, which honestly really sucks to say. You get a new spell or ability or even a passive perk each time that you level up, and some of these can be leveled up multiple times. And as you gain higher levels, you gain access to better and stronger ones, supposedly. But none of these are really that strong, fun, or engaging. They do so little to change up the combat, you get a stupid long cooldown for the majority of them, and the perks that you choose from grant you such minor things that it really didn't matter. Yes, it did contribute to my overall damage increasing and helped me over the length of the game, but I wasn't sitting there going, man, this perk sounds really fun. Maybe it's a little wacky and I should try it out, respec later. None of that ever happened. I wish they chose to be a bit more wacky with their ideas to give you something to look forward to. Even the options available at the very end of the game at the higher levels are nothing special. It was so underwhelming that I really didn't spend a lot of time even looking at them, and I don't even really want to talk about it any further because otherwise I'll bore myself. Instead, let's move on to the gear progression portion. So you can find and loot better and stronger gear throughout the time that you're playing the game, but you can also break down the gear and upgrade them. So if you have the right materials, you can increase the quality, causing the basic gear stats to increase, and that's about it. So if you found a piece of gear with some good perks on it, you can just stick with that till the end of the game, because they don't get any stronger the further that you go. Instead, they match the same damage reduction or damage overall as the new gear that you're picking up or dismantling to upgrade your current gear. So you might as well just find something you like and get used to it, because you're going to be fucking keeping it for a long ass time. Unless you find a perk attached to a very specific piece of gear that you like more, then there is almost no reason to change to that gear at all. This goes for weapons as well. Now the weapons, I'll admit, they do have a large diversity and selection of different types of weapons here. They have axes and spears and swords to pistols, wands, spellbooks, and rifles. Although some of the weapons actually look pretty cool, similar choices are made when you're deciding on which one to go with. Like, find one with a good perk that you're enjoying using and just stick with it and upgrade it throughout the rest of the game. Because the only other reason that you would need to swap to something different is if it's a higher quality. Yet the differences of that higher quality are so minimal that I rarely found myself ever swapping to something. And I never swapped to something that wasn't unique that I could just upgrade further. I feel like I've been shitting on the gameplay here and the progression, maybe even story, quite a bit, but I wanted to be able to explain the different choices that you get when playing the game, why they matter, or sometimes why they don't, and how that affects your ability to continue playing Avowed. But let's move on to the best part of the game, and that's going to be the characters and the world. The writing, the voice acting of this game is just top notch. The world that it's set in is pretty damn impressive. It feels like a very fully fleshed out world that every character understands the way it works, with its gods and its resurrection through the wheel, the politics within it. Your party of characters is honestly pretty amazing. You only get to keep 2 of them with you at any given time, which did make it a little tough to choose between the 4 that are available in total. Now, Kai is the first guy that you run across, and he is a must, if you ask me. It's the same voice actor as Garrus from Mass Effect. He's witty and smart and personable, and often really fucking funny. The other characters are honestly pretty great as well, but they really do not hold a candle to my dude Kai. Other than the pink fuzzy lady who is always horny. Yeah, anywho, they always have some quip to throw out there when you're conversing with another character, or you just finished a specific scenario. You can return to the camp and also interact with them more personally. I can't express how well they're written and how good they fit within the story and world of the game. Legit, my favorite part of this was just listening to my party members and what they had to say, and then hitting them with a joke back to be able to lighten the mood in these dark times. If you enjoy things like that, I would almost say to just play through this game, just to experience these characters alone. The last time that I felt a group or team that was this diverse and so well put together was maybe in Dragon Age and Mass Effect, which are both BioWare games. So if it can hold up to those, then Obsidian is cooking up something pretty good here. The world that they place these characters in is already established from previous games in the Pillars of Eternity universe, meaning that they can pull a lot of aspects from those. But experiencing this world in a new format of first and third person, with the action combat and everything as well, makes it pretty interesting. Now, I personally have not played a Pillars of Eternity game, but I have heard a ton of great things about it. Every time that I turn a corner in this game, I was met with something rather beautiful in the environment or intriguing off in the distance. Other than the game having a mostly linear dungeon design and just slightly open zones without a ton of nuance to it, I liked a majority of them. How they were structured and how they had different buildings and people and areas to explore. In the end, I left pretty happy with what was on display in this pretty gorgeous game. One thing I didn't mention earlier is that there is a character creator at the start of this game where you can choose a godly feature that is prominent in the story and everyone talks about it. Now, this aspect alone is pretty interesting because although the character creator itself is pretty lacking for the most part, I decided to cover my face with an entire piece of bark from a tree trunk. And it was fucking hilarious. I even made a character initially that I played for about an hour or two through the tutorial island, and I had the godlike feature turned off. And after playing for 2 hours or so, and then characters kept mentioning this godlike feature, I went in and recreated my character from the beginning and covered my entire face with this thing. It felt so much more fitting and fucked up to be in this world that I was in with these features that were constantly being commented on in any conversation that I had. It'd be like, oh shit, you have a godlike feature, you got that fungus or whatever on your face, that's crazy. But having a character that didn't have any of those because I decided to turn it off just didn't really fit. So re-rolling my character and starting over again felt so much better. Now for the final bits of this review. I want to hit on some smaller things like the UI, difficulty, graphics, bugs, and the audio and music. So let's get started first with the audio and music portion. The world, weapons, enemies, combat, it all sounds amazing. The characters, as I said before, they're all voice acted, including the random NPCs, and they're voice acted very well. And every crack of a lightning bolt or a rifle bullet sounds super crisp, while every clash of a sword or shield bash is fantastic. No complaints here on the audio end, pretty much whatsoever. With the music, I felt like when there was music, it was done very well, especially in the zones where maybe you're amping up during a fight or story mission. And those zones themselves usually had unique songs and kept you immersed in the world. Speaking of keeping you immersed in the world like that, with the voice acting, it's contextual. What I mean by that is I was climbing an abandoned tower, tower, and the two people that I had in my party would comment on the state of the tower or the world, how it destroyed this structure and how it was beautiful beforehand. This happens throughout the entire game, so it's pretty fucking impressive. Getting into the UI, I talked about it a little bit before, but it really just gets the job done. I never had any issues with the UI, but it was very simple, quick and painless to get in and out of. No fluff, but also no jank. So I'll take it. Speaking of jank though, let's talk about the graphics. Good fucking lord, is it a pretty game? But it is broken sometimes. Textures are popping in and out. I fell through a rock at some point in the game and couldn't get out, had to reload. Characters' outfits and hair have insane physics sometimes. They just spin around in circles when I'm talking to them in a cutscene. It's a bit all over the place. But when it's not being janky, it is very pretty. But when it comes to the jankiness, it took me out of the immersion just a bit, and the world does feel a little bit flat, meaning that the textures don't really feel as good as they could have been. Like there's grass in the game that just looks like it's 3 or 4 PNGs just glued together, and they don't have any physics or movement. It's just like 4 pictures that are cross-stitched together. It's crazy. Or the fact that with the characters in the cutscenes, again, they just stand there like glued to the ground, but their arms are just waving around. Maybe their eyes and face will move a little bit, but just like a lot of the previous games in series just like this, they cycle through the same 10 or 12 animations, just waving their arms around in a certain pattern. It's the boring same stuff that we have seen for years. Now for difficulty of the game, I played it on normal as I do for most games nowadays for a few reasons. I like to play games the way the developer intended it because I don't really want to spend double the amount of time playing a game for some arbitrary difficulty curve that usually doesn't feel that great. I used to play things on the harder or even the hardest difficulty. I have really given up on that playing the hardest difficulty thing because there's just too many games to play at this point. But specifically for Avowed, as I mentioned previously, the difficulty is not really there at all. This game is very easy to just mow through everybody, including the bosses and the final boss of the game, with little to no issue at all. I rarely had to use any potions or even the items that you can cook in the game that gives you buffs. I honestly really only consumed them whenever I was already in that menu doing something else, and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot I have that item that can buff me. Let me go ahead and use that, I guess. And you gain an almost infinite number of health and mana potions that cause you to practically never die. Also, you get a healing ability as well, so it's not challenging in the slightest. I think I died more from falling off of a cliff than I did in actual combat, so take that as you want. But that's going to be it for this review. A rather large video for me. Some of these reviews take quite a bit when they are a larger game. To cap it off though, my biggest likes and dislikes for this are, well, with the likes, as I said, the characters and the voice acting. A bit of the world design, and for the negatives though, just the repetitive nature of the combat and the boring skills and skill tree. They had so many options to do a lot more here, and I left feeling like it was mediocre at best. The story was slightly disappointing by the end of it, but it wasn't the worst thing. If you can get this on Game Pass, then awesome. That's how I played it. Pick it up, play it for a weekend. As I've suggested to anyone who's asked me about this game, if you play through the first 8 hours and you find it to just be kind of meh, don't expect it to get any better. And as long as you're okay with it being meh and you've enjoyed it and want more of that, then go for it. But if not, then play through the first, maybe the second zone of the game, enjoy what you get out of it, and then bounce off of it whenever you're done. It is currently $70 on Steam though, and at that price, I really cannot recommend it. Unless you're a die-hard Pillars fan or fiending for some of that Obsidian-esque type gameplay, then don't go for this, and I would wait for it to be on sale for at least $50 or less, because that's where you're kind of hitting the sweet spot of the quality of this game. Anyways, that's going to be it for me. I hope you enjoyed. Please do all that YouTube stuff if you made it to the end of the video with liking, subscribing, commenting, and blah 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 blah. Anyway, thank you again if you made it here. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.